Hey, good to see you, Gary.
Hey, good to see you, Stephen.
You're coming to us live from your village somewhere between New York City and Montreal.
Somewhere around there. Albany is a kind of a lodestar where we are. So
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
north of New York.
How's quarantine life? Is it treating you all right?
Well, the weird thing is being up here, and I'm not one of those like second homeowners. I spend more time up here than I do in the actual city. So
Okay.
I don't feel like I deserve the anger of, of people saying, you second homeowners coming up and spreading the disease. But it's weird. There's not that much difference because when I walk outside, it still kind of looks exactly as it does. There's like a rural road. There's a lot of sheep. The sheep aren't wearing masks, so there's a kind of continuity. One thing I've noticed, though, I mean, even though I spend most of my time in the country, I've been I've been looking at nature a lot closely, and sort of
Interesting.
looking at nature the way I'm looking at watches. You know how we watch nerds are about four lines, submariners, and all that kind of stuff. Now I'm like excited about every new thing that happens nature-wise. So I'm like, oh my God, the
Okay.
forsythias are blooming. The forsythias,
What
look
is
at
what
that.
is the four-line submariner of upstate New York nature?
You know what? I think it's the tree frog. I
Okay.
think that, yeah, I keep, they're very loud. They're kind of adorable, and they're everywhere. So they have this like giant concerto every night.
Okay.
So that's the four-line submariner of nature.
Perfect. Yeah, I think actually right before all of this started, I think you're one of the last people I went into public with, like who I like had
Yes,
dinner with in a restaurant before all of this
yes,
kicked in.
that is true. And we went to some outrageously delicious meal. It was a kaiseki meal, right? Which was like
Yeah, it was
10
incredible.
courses. Oh my God, it was so incredible. But I remember the fun part for me was that you were wearing that 56 GS that you got in Tokyo.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
kept asking to put it on,
Mm.
and I kept, even though I was enjoying the meal, I kept like sneaking a glance. And it kind of reminded me like, I got my wife her first real watch, a Nomos Rose 33. Oh God, what a watch.
Yeah,
And
it's a
now
great watch.
whenever we used to go out before COVID, she'd be like, "Hey, my face is up here," because I kept staring down at her watch. I'm like, "Oh God, it's so beautiful." And she's like, "I'm up here."
That's amazing. Yeah, it's funny. That watch has I'm not wearing it today, but that watch has
Yeah,
been my main work from home watch, mostly
excellent.
because it's the only one of the only watches yeah, it's one of the only watches I own with a date.
Yeah,
And I'm finding that I need some way to keep track of time, like of longer passages of time, because
yeah.
otherwise I wake up and I have no idea. It could be March, it could be
I
April, it could be June. I have no idea.
exactly. No, 100%. And I think, I'm wearing a lot of date watches as well. And now I almost wish like I had a day date because many times I don't know what day it is.
It's
It could
true.
be any
No,
day.
no, same.
I
I am in the same boat.
yeah.
I
So
think
this
maybe
is
we'll see a run on day dates. It'll become the official watch nerd watch of the quarantine.
yeah, this will be like a great Jack Forrester surprise that the yellow gold day date makes this huge comeback and everyone's just wearing one now because they don't know what date it is, what day
Nobody
it
has
is.
any idea. Yeah, then the people with perpetual calendars. It's like it's an arms race at this point for complications.
Yeah. Oh my God, you
Wild.
and I are both not complications people, but
No.
if anything makes us complications people, it's COVID.
Yeah, when the apocalypse comes, those people with chronographs and calendars are going to have a distinct advantage over the three hand
That's
guys
right.
like us.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, especially those obviously not quartz ones, but ones that don't have to be replaced. They may
Yeah,
become the rule. They may become the rulers of a future society.
yeah. There's some like weird watch nerd Mad Max crossover stuff going on.
Oh my
The what
God.
is it? Old Joe of the future is whoever has like a 1518. They get to rule us all.
The 1518. Whoever has
Yeah,
that should rule us all anyway.
yeah. That's all right.
So
It's fine.
yeah.
I can think of a few people who have them who I wouldn't terribly mind as a ruler.
Yeah,
But
and actually, I right before this happened, I was at a get together and somebody had a 1518, and that was the first 1518 I'd ever handled.
really, that's
And
wild.
uh, and even though, like we said, we're both not huge complications people, I have to say that might be the most beautiful watch I've ever seen. It was in yellow gold.
Yeah.
It had just the right amount of patina. It was absolutely stunning,
Those old
absolutely stunning.
Patek complications are just they're
Oh,
so elegant and they're so well designed in a way that
yeah.
like I don't think any modern complication is. It's
No,
so restrained and kind of smart. Yeah, it's great. I'm a big fan of
yeah.
those watches.
Yeah, I would say, and even among my favorite, independent brands, I would say that I often look toward things without as many complications. I
Yeah,
think right now we're really in the era of great time-only watches. But
I
in terms of
agree.
complications, I always look back at, even AP had some insane perpetual calendars back in the day,
Yeah, they
really
really
insane
did.
ones. So yeah, definitely.
So you say we're in the era of great time only watches. Are there any that are highlights for you?
Well, so recently, so in the watch I'm wearing now, if you want to do a quick wrist check, and
Yeah,
this is
that was going to be the question I asked, and then you mentioned great time only watches, and I was like, all right, we got to talk about this. But let's include what's on your wrist.
all right. So this is, and I'm a little bit ashamed of this, and I caught a lot of flack for this, but so this is something I got last year. It's an Aquanaut, which already has a kind of douchey, quotient at this point. You and Ben really wailed on it, and I understand you're wailing. I always hated it too. And to make things a little different, though, it's an Aquanaut on a bracelet.
I'm a fan.
You're a fan, thank you. And
I'm
I
a fan.
remember
I've come
talking to you about
around.
this. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've come around on the Aquanaut in general, but specifically on the Aquanaut on the bracelet.
Exactly. And I know the rubber strap mafia will still not leave me alone about this. When I put this on Instagram, I got all this, all this flaming about, get some rubber, boy, stuff like that. And I'm like, it looks great. It actually fits me better than any watch I've ever owned on the Aquanaut bracelet. And I met this guy at a party, and he was wearing it. And he was a really cool guy. He had me sign his iPhone with my finger, which I didn't know was a thing.
Okay.
He collects autographs from authors via finger on iPhone. And then I looked at his wrist and I was like, huh? Because I was never an Aquanaut kind of guy. But this gentleman is blessed with the same tiny wrist that I am. And he said, I think he noticed I was staring at it. He said, yeah, try it on. And I tried it on. I was like, oh my God. And I love to swim, so I swim 2 hours a day. And one of the categories of watches I love the most are watches that look great underwater. And when I put that on, I called my AD the next day, and he said, "Oh yeah, we happen to have an Aquanaut on a bracelet in our safe." And so I came in and I got it the next day, and I went to the pool immediately, and I just jumped into the pool, because when you're swimming with a watch, you want a watch that really clings to your wrist just in the right way, so you don't even notice it as you're swimming. You don't have to adjust it as you do laps if it's sort of wobbly on your wrist. And most of the watches I have that I swim with have a little bit of wobble. This is insane. And the way it looks, I took it to a pool in LA, and I was swimming, and the way the light hits it underwater, it just makes you want to eat chocolate bar after chocolate bar. It's heaven. And I know there's a lot of people who are anti-Aquanaut for a start, even good friends of mine who are wonderful, old-time collectors say, well, it's a poor man's Nautilus, etc. But I've really come around, especially on a bracelet.
Yeah, I've come around on it too. I think there's something, especially with the popularity of the Nautilus over the last couple of years, which I love the Nautilus. But there's something so ubiquitous about it now, and so kind of like, I paid double retail for it, or like I know a guy, and it's just like I'm kind of sick of it. And the Aquanaut is the like, I'm doing it, but I'm doing it differently. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm doing this thing for me.
Yeah. No, I agree completely, and I agree with you guys. And even at this point, even Goldberger is dissing on the throwing shade on the Nautilus.
Yeah.
So I think things have gotten really out of hand, and I agree that there's a kind of boredom quotient now where it's all about stainless steel Rolex, AP, and Patek. And my God, I don't want to go that. I never thought I would go that way. Most of my collection, such as it is about much weirder pieces. But this just feels so damn good. I can't stop.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Underwater, that watch has a really flat crystal. I would imagine that means underwater, the dial is just like super sharp and legible, right?
It's the most legible watch I've ever owned. In fact, I think I may die with this watch on my wrist, because it's the perfect old man's watch or old person's watch. Because it's insane, right? The lume there's like enough lume to light up the moon on this thing, and then the Arabic numerals are ginormous. Even I love my tri-compacts, but there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to tell the date when I'm like 70. But on this thing, everything is just old man ready.
Old man ready. That should be Patek's new slogan for the Aquanaut. The Patek Philippe Aquanaut, old man ready.
I think it's better than you never really own a Patek. You just leave it for your next
Yeah,
generation or
right,
something.
right. Which they've had for like, I guess almost 30 years now. I think that campaign, 25 years.
I think Old Man
Um,
Ready is easier off the tongue.
yeah, I would agree. Um, have you added anything else? So we did your episode of Talking Watches. It
Yeah,
aired in, I guess, yeah, a little over a year ago now, in
yeah.
February of 2019. Has anything else other than that Aquanaut kind of made its way into your collection since then?
Well, I have to say I've been slowing down a lot. So last
Mm,
year I got the Aquanaut, and this year I got the Black Bay 58,
yeah.
which is a wonderful, wonderful watch. One of those watches, like I said, I got it because I'm not a sub guy at all. And in fact, I never thought I would own a sub. But I love the way certain things look underwater. And the moment I saw that watch, I thought, wow, that fauxtina and faux gilt that drives some people mad is going to look so good under 3 feet of water with the sun shining on it. And it has not disappointed. Also, I know some people are dissing the bracelet. For me, and even with my tiny wrist, it's worked out really well. So I guess the two watches I've got are all in that kind of swimming category.
Mm,
But a kind of bigger quasi-philosophical question has been presenting itself, and that is, when does one stop?
yeah.
Watching the March Madness, which all of us are glued to on HODINKEE, and thank you guys for doing that. You really have taken our minds off some dismal, dismal events. And me and some other Talking Watches alum, I'm not going to say who, but we're all like emailing each other like, oh my God, I'm so worried.
I
It's
love that.
horrible.
We'll
Yeah.
we'll talk about your
Yeah.
campaigning in the comments in a minute.
Okay.
We'll talk about
Okay.
that for sure.
Well, the watching that stuff, I realized, that there are people who collect with a kind of capital C.
Hmm.
Jason Singer comes to mind, obviously Goldberger, um, uh, Roni Madvani, who's probably my favorite of all the collectors that have been on Talking Watches. Like on Instagram, he's the first person. The algorithm always thinks that I'm going to want to see him first. So whenever I wake up in the morning,
Mm.
turn on Instagram, every time one of his watches pops up, it's not going to be a Nautilus or an RO or whatever. It's going to be something crazy, and I can't wait
Yeah.
to see it. It's not like, oh, look, I'm wearing a Pepsi with a Pepsi. Look at me. Not that there's anything wrong with Pepsis; they're amazing. I own one. But at the same time, there are real collectors like that, and then there's people like me and others who I think of their collections as having a kind of finite amount of watches. And I wear all my watches, so I kind of parse them out by 31 days a
Mm.
month, well, certain months, and I'll assign a number of days to each watch. So I love my 1675 Pepsi. I'll wear that 4 days out of the month. My Junghans Max Bill, still love it, but there's not that much of a need for it, so I'll wear it one day out of the month. But I'll still wear it because I want that Bauhausy connection to go on. So for me, the question then becomes, if I'm going to parse things out, if I'm going to, wear things once a month or several times a month, how many watches can I honestly own and still put all of them into rotation?
Yeah.
So for me, it feels like that number is reaching its peak. I'm at about 13 watches. I don't have much room for too many more. I think for my finale, I may head toward Grand Seiko, which I feel is a real hole in my collection right now.
Yeah.
See, playing around with your Grand Seiko and that last wonderful meal we had I was like, my God, why am I not living this dream? And I keep going
It's a
back
good
and forth.
dream, I promise.
It's a great dream. And then I can say that I'm not like just some kind of Europhile, just hanging out with watches from two contiguous European nations, And the watch, I keep going back and forth on which Grand Seiko to get. Thanks to you, I've been reading up on the grammar of design and all that stuff. I think I may get, and there's this guy on Instagram whom I love, this kind of friend who always bullies me into getting a Grand Seiko called Mr. Grand Seiko.
Hmm.
He's a lovely guy from Australia. And the watch that he thinks that would look good on my tiny wrist is the SBGW 033, which is, I believe,
Yeah.
the second recreation of the Grand Seiko first. So that was around
Yeah.
2014. And it's 36 millimeters. It's a beautiful watch. Weirdly enough, there was a 2-watch collection that Jack did that had the longest Hexonia Thin, which I already own, and that particular Grand Seiko model.
Yep.
And so I could totally see myself getting that to sort of complete that 2-watch collection.
I could see you with that watch. That's a great watch. I know there's a collector in San Francisco who comes to a lot of our events, helps us out with some HODINKEE.jp stuff. This guy Sug, he's amazing.
Yeah.
Owns that watch, and
Oh, great.
he's a great collector. He has that and an Explorer, I would say, are the two pieces he posts about the most.
Yeah. He's Galactical on.
He is Galactical. Yeah, shout
I
out to
love
Sug on,
Galactical. Shout out to Galactical.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's amazing, and I message him about that watch probably like twice a month, 3 times a month, because
Oh
I
my
just every
God.
time he posts a good photo of it, I just
Yeah.
it's so perfect.
That's right, and he posts his a lot with the 1016, which is
Yeah.
also one of my favorite watches. Yeah, so I think in the end, I've decided that there's sort of like 4 categories of watches that I love, and I
Mm.
just want to complete what I want in all of those 4 categories.
Okay.
So the first one is, and that people kind of ask me like, what watches should I get? Before COVID, people would stop me on the streets of New York and be, and touch my elbow and say, hey, I'm just starting collecting. What should I get? And I always say, think about what your favorite golden era of watches was.
Mm.
And mine is fairly predictable. It's the late 50s, sort of through the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And that encompasses a lot of the watches I love, the 1675, the 1016. And by the way, kudos to the GMT stuff you guys did. Oof,
Oh yeah,
that was very
John and
pornographic.
Eric did an unbelievable job there.
John and Eric just killed it. Probably one of my favorite reference points, just because I love the GMT so much.
Yeah, I agree. Same.
So I would say the 1675 for me, 1016, some Patek reference, like the 3445 for me, which is kind of a bit of a sleeper hit. But if somebody doesn't want to spend that much money, there's definitely, you can, Gallet has some great stuff, Wittenauer, the old pole router that everyone loves from that era. So something from that era, if that's your golden era, or if not, some other era. For me, swimming watches, as I've mentioned. I would say dress watches are important. Some people say that they're about to head, in the same direction as pocket watches, but I sincerely hope that's not the case, because I think nothing is more elegant than a very thin dress watch.
Yeah.
And the final category for me are what I think of as the new holy trinity of watches, which is Nomos, Tudor, and Grand Seiko. Because a lot of people who ask me, what watch should I get? They're not gazillionaires, and they're not gonna save up for a Lange or a Patek, and maybe even a sub these days may be out of their range. But for many of them, I recommend the Nomos for the design, a Tudor if they need a great a great sports watch, or a Grand Seiko just for value for the money. Those are the 3 most interesting brands, I think, for me these days.
Yeah,
so having a few watches from that is very important for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think, those brands are doing things that are really interesting. And while a lot of other brands are doing kind of sameness or competing with each other in a handful of categories, each of those brands is doing its own thing. Like, they have their own personality, their own value proposition, their own design sensibility. And, even Tudor, where it's heavily drawn on the kind of like shared history between them and Rolex, it's a real shared history, and it's authentic, and it doesn't feel put on to me at all.
Oh no, I'm amazed with Tudor. And there's a kind of, there's almost a cliche these days that Tudor is what Rolex used to be back in the day. But it makes perfect sense, because people can actually buy Tudors, as opposed to Rolex. I mean, to me, Rolex is a great company. I still have more Rolexes than any other watch in my collection. But to me, Rolex is not so much a watch company now. It's more like a performance art collective, where you can't really buy their watches. It's like something you see and then you talk about, but they're not really available for sale.
I love this idea.
They're more like, they're like a hip performance art thing coming out of Switzerland.
I love the idea that like Rolex would continue to advertise and like seed watches with certain people and put up storefronts, but that the storefronts would just be empty, like the doors are locked.
Yes!
There's just nothing,
That's kind of the case already in some ways, unless you're desperately looking for a date just.
We at HODINKEE HQ play a game when we're traveling. Anytime we're traveling in a group in a city outside of New York, if we pass by a Rolex boutique, it's the walk in and figure out who gets to ask if they have any Daytonas, and see what the responses are. And typically, we don't. Most people don't know that we work in the industry, whatever. There's a handful of the bigger boutiques who we have relationships with, and we know, so we can't get away with it. But I can walk in off the street in Tokyo or in LA or in wherever, and just ask an AD, and typically I get laughed at. Just like
They
outright
really
laughed at.
laugh. They
I
actually
mean,
laugh.
they're polite about it, but like it's
Yeah.
the most polite way of laughing. It's like oh sir, may I show you something else? You know, it's a classic thing, but
Have you not
yeah,
read the news? Yeah,
right, exactly. Yeah,
it's too funny.
it's a wild thing, but yeah, I think you're collecting. It's interesting that you think of it in these four categories, because looking over your Talking Watches episode and then knowing what else is in your collection, it is interesting how it all just does kind of fit into those categories, but also how those categories sort of relate to one another. Like the way that a white dial Oyster Perpetual 39 sits next to an Explorer, sits next to a Black Bay 36, sits next to a 3445. Like these things all have these sort of through lines and relationships to one another, which I think is a really interesting part of your collection. Like it feels like a collection, not like a bunch of random pieces.
Absolutely. And I remember when I was, the day after I'd met that gentleman at the party, and I thought, wow, can I actually own an Aquanaut? I remember quickly writing usually I write to you and Eric Wins, you're like my touchstones on stuff like this. And I remember you writing back and saying, well, if you look at it in a certain way, the Aquanaut on a bracelet has some relationship possibly with a 1016 on a
Yeah.
bracelet. And I never thought of it that way because they're so different, obviously. One is robust, the other is incredibly thin, actually robust in its own way. But one has a date, obviously the other doesn't. One is a Genta knockoff, the other preceded it by decades. But weirdly enough, there is something that I see now in terms of pure functionality. The 369 of the Explorer was so helpful if you're in the middle of a blizzard climbing a mountain. And likewise, the insanely large Arabic numerals on a Aquanaut are incredibly helpful too. So these little connections are really incredible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really also love your idea of wanting to use all of your watches, to wear them. It's a thing that it's one of the many things that gives me great anxiety in life is the idea of having watches and things in general, but specifically watches that sit unused. Like the idea of a great watch sitting in a box in my closet, not getting worn. Like actually, like I can feel myself getting anxious now. I hate that.
I'm getting
hate
anxious
that
with you.
idea. Yeah, I hate that idea. Something about it feels so wasteful, and it seems almost like disrespectful to the object to let it languish there.
Yes, the object and the maker of the object, and and the fact that other people may want this object who will actually use it and will treasure it. People in this hobby always talk about how, well, you're not a real vintage watch collector until you've bought and sold 10 watches, etc. But for me, I buy the watches, but I haven't sold any yet, and I've only been doing this for 4 years or so. But each one, as you've said, fits into my ideas of what a collection should look like. But also, each one now has an incredible memory. This is the watch I took, to Jerusalem. This is the watch that I took on a tour of Germany and Austria. This is, all these different things keep popping up, and now it's hard for me to let them go. So, and not to mention the fact that I wouldn't mind my kid owning all of them. And he already has a favorite. Even at age 6, he already knows which one he wants, and it's the 1675 GMT. So he has good taste.
Kid has good taste. Yeah, exactly.
Has good taste. Yeah, that's the one he likes. But yeah, absolutely. And if I did reach this, if I did feel like I stopped wanting to wear a watch, I would sell it immediately. And that would be without a doubt. But so far that hasn't happened. And now that I'm in quarantine and everyone's going crazy, it's the watches. I mean, I wrote that piece in the New Yorker a couple of years ago, and I started getting into watches because I was so freaked out about where I thought the world was headed. And that was 2016. So by now, I am 10 times more freaked out, as I'm sure we all are. I mean, this has become as dystopian as any dystopian writer could imagine. So for me now, the presence of that ticking hand has become even more important as a source of calm, and and as a source of diversion. Things like March Madness really do help keep me sane, because it's just, I don't care what, I mean, it could be It could be a mongoose on a unicycle playing with a tuba. Anything. I mean, the Tiger
Yeah.
King. I watched the Tiger King. This is so not me, but I watched all of it. You know,
It's an
so
incredible, the production on that is
it's
insanity.
amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're doing a lot
something
of.
we've talked about, and I wonder how this fits into what you're saying now about, the watches as stability is the idea of precision.
Yes.
I for a long time was not somebody who cared.
Yeah.
Like I would never time my watches. It was just not something I did. And I think
Yeah.
maybe a year ago that changed.
Yeah.
Now I'm using the HODINKEE app. Every watch gets set to the second. It gets checked if I'm wearing it multiple days in a row. Is that something you're thinking about more? Because I know that's something that's important to you.
I did that from the very first watch I got, from the Max Bill that I bought. I'm obsessive. I mean, it fits with my sort of obsessive personality to begin with. But we're trying to regulate ourselves. I was just reading this New Yorker article about, people's fear of toilet paper shortage, right? And how, there's all these psychoanalysts talking about how toilet paper give us a sense of control. It's almost a kind of Freudian thing. We'll never be the dirty child running around if we have toilet paper. But for me, having watches be precise is also very important. And weirdly enough, now that I'm in the country and there's nothing to do, as I check my watches, it's like the watches, it's like they know that the whole world has gone nuts, and they've become more precise over the last month.
Oh, interesting.
It's so weird. I was wearing my Patek 3445, which is, 1967, I think was its birth year. So it's been around for 50 years. It keeps time to about 1 second or 2 seconds per day.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's a Patek, yeah. But almost all the watches have started as if sensing the fear, as if sensing my own increased pulse. They've started calming down and becoming more. Almost all of them are COSC certified at this point, even though most of them are quite old. My Tudor Black Bay 36, which is it's not an in-house movement at all. It's an ETA. I imagine a heavily modified ETA, but it's down to like plus 1 second.
Wow.
Crazy stuff. So I think everyone's pitching in these days, including timepieces.
They're doing their part. Is there a watch in your collection? I mean, you said you kind of figure out how many days a month you're going to wear each piece. Yep. Is there one or two watches in your collection that you wish you could wear more? That just like you find yourself when you run out of those days, you're like, this kind of hurts.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the one that I really, well, it's complicated these days. The watch that I really want to wear most right now is that GMT. And I think the reason for that is because I'm desperate to travel. I usually spend at least 2 months out of the year on the road. And while I miss my family and miss my kid quite a bit, I still live for that stuff. Almost all the books I've written kind of involve going somewhere else. So for me, like Success, my last book was all about this gigantic bus trip across the country. So for me, not being able to leave has been, and not being able to change time zones, obviously, has been a little sad. I use it, to check out the time in LA, but you subtract 3 hours, even a mathematical idiot like me can figure out, that if it's 3 o'clock here, it's probably noon over there, right? So that's the watch that I wish I could wear most. The other stuff is, so once around May 15th, we open up the pool up here. And that's when I really want to hit all the swimming watches a lot more, and probably will. They'll probably give them a little bit more time because they're just, they're so imperative to, if I swim 2 hours a day, I need to know when to get out.
Yeah, right. So if you're wearing a watch, like let's say the 3445 on a given day, but it's time to go swimming, you'll swap it for something pool appropriate?
Well, I'll swap it to whatever the last watch I was wearing that was pool appropriate.
Okay.
It's a very, So in addition to getting 3 or 4 days on my wrist, some of the other watches won't be worn all the time, but will continue their duty as swim watches until the next swim watch takes over. It's such a crazy system. It's like,
I love that you have a system. That's great. I think so many people so many collectors do the thing where, especially when you start getting between like 8 to 12 watches, it just becomes chaos. And it's like, oh, today I'm going to wear this. Oh, I realized I didn't wear this watch for the last 6 weeks, and it's just all over the place. I love that you're thinking about this and you think about
Yep.
it as a set
Yep.
and a collection, and
Yep.
making sure they're all kind of getting their due.
Yeah, and I'm also, and they're divided in a way that there's a sense of excitement. So there's not going to be all the Rolexes bunched together, or the Nomoses hanging out together. It's always, oh wow, now I'm going to go from Switzerland to Germany, which is one reason I think why the Grand Seiko would be such a nice way to break things up, even though it
Yeah.
shares a lot with some of the other pieces. It's a dress watch, it's a time only watch, but having a blued seconds hand. Seeing those markers in that case, seeing that Zaratsu polishing, I think will really brighten up. Will really
Yeah.
make me feel like I'm in a whole different world.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've always been a fan of Grand Seiko, for years and years now, but I only acquired my first one in, I guess it was October. Wearing that watch is unlike wearing anything else. The experience of it, the way you interact with it, the way the
Yeah,
light hits it. I always thought I got it, and I think I maybe
yeah,
got it intellectually, but
yeah.
I get it emotionally now in a way that I
Yes,
didn't. And I
yes.
really do feel it's a substantively different experience than wearing a Swiss watch or a German watch.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, it's a real eye opener, and I mean, I remember just looking at the facets of that watch when I was bumming your watch during that Kaseki meal. And yours has been around since the early '70s, I believe, right? Um,
Yeah,
so it's almost a 50-year-old watch, and obviously it's seen some wear, but it still really lights up under a certain light. It just,
yeah,
by
exactly.
which I mean the case of it.
Right.
I think they're the most interesting cases that were ever made, or
Agreed.
definitely up there with them. Definitely up there.
Agreed. So we've talked a little bit about watch madness, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. I have to say, uh, you and maybe Fred Savage have been the two most active players, let's say, participants. Campaigning in the comments on social media. It's been really, I just as somebody kind of watching from the outside, I guess from the inside outside, I don't know what you'd call it.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
I have found it really fun just watching you kind of interact with readers and with other folks.
Well, by the way, I just looked at my iPhone and found out I won the second round I was up in.
Oh,
Uh,
perfect.
so now I'm up against, oh boy, I'm up against Keegan Keegan Allen. Oh, that's going to be a tough one.
That's
That's
going to
not
be a
going to
good
be a.
matchup.
That's a good matchup, yeah. But oh my God, I can't believe I've triumphed against such great collectors. A wonderful basketball star and a adventurer. Oof. I don't know. Thank you, HODINKEE um, voters. Wow, I'm almost about to cry, but I can't. But in a different world, I would. No, we are. Yes, I've been doing what I think one reader called retail politics.
I love it.
Which is usually a Cole Pennington kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
He's usually very good at this, but I've taken
Oh
a
yeah.
page from Cole. Yes, absolutely. I've been on the site, sort of trying to be funny about it, but hopefully my desperation doesn't show that much, right? It's not like dripping like, please vote
No,
for
I
me. This
think
is
it's
all
I
I
think it's
have in
good.
quarantine. This is all I
Some
have.
some healthy competition is always a good thing. I'm always going to sign up for that.
Well, I'm so happy to be in the Sweet 16. Yes, but I will say that that some of the other participants and I have been emailing, and it's like we're all really watching this stuff and totally
That's
invested
so
in this.
funny.
I love Fred. Oh my God, if it was me versus Fred, I think I would. I think I would die because I love him so much. He'd probably win, but he's the other guy that I've been supporting a lot. And there's him, and yeah, there's a couple of guys. Him, I would say, and this is, by the way, everyone's great. I have not seen a Talking Watches where I've sort of tuned out or not been,
Yeah.
not dropped everything to spend the next 12 minutes watching them. So everyone's incredible. But I would say I love Fred's collection. It's just so Fred. He's like the nicest guy in an industry that's maybe not the nicest industry on the planet.
Yeah.
I love Morgan King's collection. I love Daniel Day
Agreed.
Kim. I had lunch with him and we sort of exchanged watches. He's a really great guy. I'm so glad he survived COVID, which
Yeah.
that made me so happy. One of the greatest moments of this whole thing for me was just the fact that such a good guy and he just came out of it so well. And I hope others will as well. But yeah, his collection is really great. His collection is great because he has that Seiko in there that just kind of
Right.
counterbalances all the other stuff. I was very, and sometimes you're sad. I've noticed in the comments people talk about how celebrities are sort of vanquishing some of the collectors. Yeah, sometimes I feel like I wish that wasn't the case.
Mm,
Roni Madvani was the one that I felt the most sort of sad
mm.
about, because that is a world-class collection that has really no one. I mean, maybe some other people are doing something like that, but I'm sure no one is doing that as well as Roni.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, there were a handful of people who drew really tough matchups early on. Like Roni drew against Moki Martin, who was just this
Yeah,
incredible
yeah,
story. You know,
no,
that
incredible,
was a tough
incredible.
matchup.
Yeah,
Tony Fidel going against John Mayer in the first round. Like
yeah,
there's
that's true.
some people who
Yeah,
drew unlucky. And again, it was all done
yeah,
numerically based on the order in
yeah,
which they ran.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
just how the math worked out. But yeah.
But I also understand. I understand the instinct to sort of vote for, what in comments are called the everyman. I mean, Moki and that wonderful Canadian astronaut. I mean, I get
Yeah.
it. To be able to see a watch that's actually used for something, other than me in a pool, that's exciting, right? That's really incredible. And it's part of my sort of, Tudor Grand Seiko Nomos argument that there's watches that people who aren't, simply in tech or finance, not that there's anything wrong with that, but who use their watches for some daily purpose. And those people will usually be buying affordable watches. So those two
Mm.
segments are wonderful, and I hope they survive as well. So there's so many ways to skin this cat. There's like so many. There's collectors, there's celebrities, there's interesting stories. It's a very, I you know we're all hooked on this thing, I have to say. And
Yeah.
during my one of my watch get-togethers is now getting together on Zoom,
Hmm.
which is very weird. All Zoom stuff is very weird. But we've been having a lot of fun just talking about that. And there's a couple of people who are Talking Watch alum who are in that Zoom
That's
call.
great. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun for us to see that the folks in it are getting involved in it. I mean, that wasn't originally part of the plan. Like
Yeah,
we did not think it would happen, but we didn't
yeah.
anticipate it. I think to the degree it's happening, and it's nice to see how engaged everybody is, and that everybody's
Oh
still
yeah.
happy to have done it. You know, to have been a part of
Oh
this
yeah.
thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's a real. I have to say, I am now, and this may be almost a sad statement. I think I'm as recognized on street corners for talking watches as I am for, the 6 books I've written or whatever, which is very
I'm
sad.
sorry.
It's very
Sorry about
sad.
that.
No, I was this is before COVID. Last summer actually, I was buying. We have a great farm near us which has amazing meats, and I was
Mm.
buying this lamb steak. Oh God, this lamb steak. Just thinking about it makes me want to eat a lamb steak. And there was a 17-year-old farmhand, and he came up to me and said, "You're Gary Shteyngart. I love your work." And I said, "Oh, thank you. Which novel?" And he's like, "Novel? No, no. I mean, from Talking Watches."
that's
And
that's your work now. I'm so
that's my
sorry.
work now. It's yeah. And he said, I'm going to college next year, but I'm gonna buy my first Seiko. And he was talking about his first Seiko and other stuff. It's very, very sweet. And, he said, "What should I get? Should I get a Presage? Should I get this?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I guess that's who I am now." So
That's who you are. Man, well, when the New Yorker stops calling, if they ever do, let me know. We've
oh
always got a
yeah,
place for you.
I that may happen.
Speaking of the New Yorker, real quick,
Yes,
you wrote a
yeah,
piece this past week, right?
yeah. I have a piece in. Yeah.
I happen to really like it. Can you
Oh, thank
tell
you.
our audience about it a little bit?
Sure. So the New Yorker has, and this is in the current issue. By current, I mean, I can't remember see, I don't know let me see the date on my watch. So it's it's April 10th. So the week of April 10th. It's current on that. By the time you hear this, there may be another issue coming out. But so the New Yorker put together some of its writers to write a very kind of quick vignettes about what it's like to be living under this during this pandemic. And so my piece really is about a couple of things. It's about being upstate. It's about some of the stuff that we talked about earlier. It's about trying to look to nature for connections.
Hmm.
It's about sort of being isolated, but at the same time seeing little snippets um, of what's happening, and sort of seeing COVID and everything that happens, even though not much is happening. So, for example, as I was walking down the street, down my road, there was this cacophony of um, tree frogs and geese almost fighting with each other. And it seemed so crazy, but it seemed so emblematic of the time that we live in. And then as I was walking, this gigantic flash storm overtook me out of nowhere. And I had to hunker down. I was looking for shelter, literally sheltering in place. And the first place I found was an abandoned, apocalyptic looking children's summer camp. That was it was like an international children's summer camp that had all the flags of the world and all these like exhortations to change the world and save the world. And so I'm hiding underneath this like a makeshift stage that they had built for their theater program. And I'm stepping on this Nerf ball that the local possums have half eaten. And so I'm in this Mad Max scenario in the middle of this really beautiful looking countryside while COVID is happening. So I guess almost every writer I know, and the New Yorker has gathered some of us, is keeping meticulous notes at this point, because this seems like one of these events that is, I remember like, for example, when 9/11 happened and I was in New York, we were too shocked to take notes because it happened so quickly. It happens in a matter of minutes, of hours. But this goes on and on and on. And many of us are, like myself, isolated. Most of us are isolated. So it's almost like our minds are turning and turning upon themselves. I'm not a writer that concentrates on interiority the way some writers do. Most of my books are very social. They're all about people going out, drinking, having fun, meeting, falling in love, falling out of love. I think my books are some of the more social books out there. But for this, there's a feeling of my trying to mine other material, just because I'm surrounded by nothing but geese and tree frogs, and soon the cicadas will come out and join that chorus. But I'm faced with almost my own worst enemy, which is stillness. And trying to make something out of that stillness is, I think, what I tried to do with that essay.
Yeah, we'll link it up in the show notes. It's a relatively short read. I think everybody who's listening to this should go give it a look. I think one of the things I like about your writing in general, and just about you in general, and whenever we're chatting, is your ability to balance gravity and levity. I think is a finely honed skill.
Thank you.
And I think this essay does it really nicely. That it hints at the fact that we're living through something very serious, but it does that in a way that doesn't feel gloomy or sort of doomsaying, but instead kind of gives us an opportunity to maybe think about ourselves a little bit and think about how we fit into things.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. No, humorous melancholia is sort of the way I usually roll. So, and this is generally, humorous. It's definitely a melancholy time. But I do feel up here, and again, I'm not a second homeowner. I'm up here more than in New York. But I do feel I miss, even though I wouldn't be able to see my friends, I do miss the connection. I miss the city, and I know that it's going through one of its darkest hours. And that makes me so sad. And lately I've been thinking that even though I do like to turn to the humorous, I think it's okay, even though we're constantly being told to buck up and to think of when this will be over. But I think it's important to feel some of the sadness that's happening. It's important to feel sad for the vulnerable people, for the heroic people on the front lines, everyone who's doing more than I'm doing to help out, and to think of people who will continue to be vulnerable when this is over. So
yeah,
watches are a great distraction. I'm so glad we have them. I'm so glad we have March Madness, but at the same time, I think it's important to always acknowledge the world that we live in all its beauty, but in all its sadness as well.
Yeah, I agree. So to finish things off, I want to ask you, when this is all over, when we get through this, because we will get through it, we will get back to the old times, the new old times. What is the first place you're going for a drink and the first place you're going for a meal when this is all over? Because I would imagine that you, like me, are being hit very hard personally by the lack of ability to dine out.
Yes. Oh God, that was the best thing in my life. Okay, so for drink, there's no question. And by the way, when I say this, I hope that all these places survive, first of all, because there's no guarantee that they will. And it's almost shocking to think of what New York's landscape and the landscape of other cities will look like. But the first place that I drink is the bar where I've spent pretty much all my life. Like if you tallied up my hours, at least 20% of them were spent at this bar.
Okay.
And there's actually a photo of me as a baby behind the bar. Yeah, that's how close how tight I am with this bar. It's Clandestino in New York, which
Mm-hmm.
is on Canal Street between Essex and Ludlow. It's the first place I will run to when I get back to New York when this is over, and I will tip everyone so handsomely. In terms of where to eat, I think I'm thinking now up here in the town of Kingston, which is a very vibrant town. There's a new restaurant called the Kinsley Inn, Kinsley, and it's also a hotel. And they are incredible. And they have these dishes. There's an Italian dish called the bagna cauda, which sounds you've seen this. It sounds very simple. It's just this kind of anchovy sauce, and you dip vegetables. You dip raw vegetables into it. It sounds so elemental, but it's so freaking good. And they have this drink, which is a martini that combines gin and vodka.
Okay.
Holy crap. And then there's this Arctic char. Oh my God. Anyway, don't get me started. So that's definitely where I'm headed to eat. And Clandestino, where I'm headed to drink.
Perfect. Well, hopefully it's over soon. Hopefully we're there. I'll come join you at Clandestino for a drink.
Please, that's a requirement.
And we'll talk watches, like
Excellent.
usual.
Yeah, like
Again,
usual.
It's the new old times.
The new old times. Yay!
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. Thanks for doing this, and stay safe up there, and look forward to seeing you soon.
You too, Stephen. Take care.
Thanks.